December 3rd, 1972. The MS Celestial Star, a 450-foot luxury cruise liner carrying 287 passengers and 156 crew members, departed from Miami Harbor at exactly 6:47 p.m. The ship was gleaming white against the golden sunset, its decks lined with excited travelers waving to families on the dock. The vessel was bound for the Bahamas on what was advertised as the voyage of a lifetime, a 5-day luxury cruise featuring world-class entertainment, gourmet dining, and tropical paradise destinations. Captain Richard Holloway stood on the bridge, his weathered hands steady on the ship's controls. At 58 years old, he was one of the most experienced captains in the fleet, with over 30 years of maritime service and an impeccable safety record. His crew knew him as a man who ran a tight ship, demanding excellence but treating everyone with quiet respect. That evening, as the Celestial Star glided out of port, everything appeared routine. The weather was clear, the seas calm, and the passengers were already gathering in the main ballroom for the welcome cocktail reception. Radio contact was maintained with the Coast Guard until 11:34 p.m. The ship's communications officer, Thomas Brennan, reported their position as approximately 78 miles southeast of Miami, proceeding on course at 18 knots. His voice was clear and professional as he confirmed, "All systems normal. Weather holding steady. Next check-in scheduled for 0600 hours." The transmission was acknowledged, and the Celestial Star continued into the darkness, its lights twinkling like a floating city against the black Atlantic waters. That was the last anyone ever heard from them. When the ship failed to make its scheduled 6 a.m. check-in, concern began to mount. The Coast Guard attempted multiple radio contacts throughout the morning, receiving only static in response. By noon, when the Celestial Star missed its arrival time at Nassau Harbor, full-scale alarm had set in. Search and rescue operations were launched immediately, with aircraft and vessels converging on the ship's last known position. The search continued for 2 weeks. Military aircraft flew grid patterns over thousands of square miles of ocean. Coast Guard cutters combed the waters, looking for any sign of wreckage, debris, or survivors. Navy submarines were even deployed to scan the ocean floor for the ship's massive hull. But nothing was ever found. Not a lifeboat, not a piece of furniture, not a single life jacket. The Celestial Star had simply vanished, taking 443 souls with it into the depths of mystery. The disappearance made international headlines. Families gathered at Miami Harbor, holding vigil, clutching photos of their loved ones, praying for a miracle that would never come. The shipping company, Oceanic Voyages International, faced immediate scrutiny. Investigators pored over maintenance records, crew certifications, and the ship's operational history. Everything appeared to be in order. The Celestial Star had passed its most recent safety inspection with flying colors just 6 weeks before its final voyage. Theories proliferated. Some suggested a catastrophic mechanical failure, perhaps a boiler explosion that sank the ship so quickly there was no time to send a distress signal. Others pointed to the Bermuda Triangle, noting that the ship's last known position placed it squarely within the infamous region where ships and aircraft had mysteriously disappeared for decades. A few conspiracy theorists proposed more elaborate explanations involving hijacking, insurance fraud, or even alien abduction. The official investigation concluded after 8 months with a finding that satisfied no one. Presumed lost at sea due to unknown catastrophic event. Insufficient evidence to determine cause. The case was classified as an unsolved maritime disaster, joining the ranks of legendary ghost ships like the Mary Celeste and the SS Warada. Insurance companies paid out millions in claims. Families held memorial services for loved ones whose bodies would never be recovered. And slowly, painfully, the world moved on. But one person never stopped looking. Detective Sarah Mitchell had been 12 years old when the Celestial Star disappeared. Her mother, Elizabeth Mitchell, had been working as a cocktail server on the ship, saving money to put Sarah through college. Elizabeth had called her daughter from Miami the afternoon before departure, her voice bright with excitement. "I'll bring you back something beautiful from Nassau, baby. Maybe one of those conch shell necklaces you wanted." Sarah never saw her mother again. That loss shaped the trajectory of her entire life. She became obsessed with maritime disasters, studied criminal justice in college, and eventually joined the Miami-Dade Police Department. Even as she rose through the ranks, handling cases that had nothing to do with missing ships, she never stopped researching the celestial star. Her home office was covered with maps, newspaper clippings, and photos of the ship and its passengers. Colleagues thought she was chasing ghosts. Her own daughter worried about her mental health. But Sarah couldn't let it go. Over the decades, she followed every lead, no matter how implausible. She interviewed retired Coast Guard officers who had participated in the original search. She tracked down relatives of other victims, comparing notes and theories. She even hired a private oceanographer in 1998 to conduct sonar surveys of areas she believed hadn't been adequately searched. Nothing ever came of it. The ocean kept its secrets, and Sarah's obsession became a source of sadness for those who loved her. Then, in the fall of 2019, something extraordinary happened that would finally provide the answers Sarah had sought for nearly 5 decades. The city of Fort Lauderdale had been planning to demolish the old Bayside Stadium for years. The facility had been built in 1974, serving as home to various minor league sports teams before falling into disrepair and eventual abandonment. By 2019, the crumbling concrete structure had become an eyesore and a safety hazard. City officials decided to raise the stadium and redevelop the valuable waterfront property into a mixed-use complex of apartments, shops, and parks. Demolition contractor Marcus Webb and his crew began preliminary work in October. They were conducting structural assessments and removing hazardous materials when one of his workers, operating ground-penetrating radar to check for underground utilities, detected something massive beneath the stadium's northwest corner. At first, Webb assumed it was probably part of the foundation or perhaps an old storm drainage system. But as they mapped the anomaly more carefully, the readings made no sense. The underground void was enormous, roughly 400 feet long, and shaped unlike any foundation or utility tunnel Webb had ever encountered. More puzzling, the GPR showed what appeared to be multiple decks or levels within the structure, along with metal components that created distinct echoes on their equipment. Marcus called the city's engineering department, suggesting they might have found some kind of Cold War-era bunker or forgotten infrastructure from the stadium's original construction. The city sent its own team of engineers, who ran additional scans and took core samples from the ground. What they found sent shock waves through the entire operation. The samples brought up fragments of corroded steel, teak wood, and most bizarrely, ceramic dinnerware bearing the logo of Oceanic Voyages International. The engineers stood in stunned silence as they examined a broken plate fragment showing the distinctive blue anchor emblem that had adorned China aboard the company's luxury cruise ships in the 1970s. Within 24 hours, the demolition site was swarming with federal investigators, maritime archaeologists, and forensic teams. The Coast Guard sent representatives. The FBI opened a case file, and when news leaked to the media, the story exploded across every news outlet in the country. Somehow, impossibly, a 450-foot cruise ship appeared to be buried beneath a football stadium that had been built 2 years after the vessel's disappearance. Sarah Mitchell was in her kitchen making coffee when her daughter called. "Mom, you need to turn on the news. Right now. Channel 7. The tone in her daughter's voice made Sarah's heart race. She grabbed the remote and switched on the television just as a reporter stood in front of Bayside Stadium, police tape fluttering behind her. Confirmation from multiple sources that ground-penetrating radar has detected what appears to be a large vessel buried approximately 40 feet beneath the stadium's foundation. While officials aren't confirming specifics, sources close to the investigation say artifacts recovered from preliminary core samples match items that would have been aboard the MS Celestial Star, the luxury cruise liner that vanished without a trace in December 1972. Sarah dropped her coffee mug. It shattered on the tile floor, but she didn't notice. Her hands were shaking as she grabbed her phone and dialed the Coast Guard liaison she'd been pestering for 47 years. This time, he actually took her call. "Sarah, I was just about to contact you. You need to get down here." The excavation that followed was one of the most complex archaeological operations ever attempted. Engineers couldn't simply dig straight down. The stadium structure had to be carefully dismantled piece by piece to avoid triggering a catastrophic collapse. The ship, if that's truly what lay beneath them, was entombed in a matrix of concrete, steel rebar, and compacted earth that had been deliberately engineered to bear the weight of a massive sports facility. Dr. Raymond Foster, a maritime archaeologist from the University of Miami, took charge of the technical aspects of the dig. His team worked with structural engineers to create a plan that would safely expose the buried vessel while preserving evidence. They built a massive cofferdam around the excavation site, pumping out groundwater to prevent flooding. Cranes and excavators worked in carefully choreographed precision, removing debris layer by layer. 3 weeks into the excavation, they broke through to the ship's superstructure. Dr. Foster was the first to descend into the access shaft, his helmet-mounted camera broadcasting images to monitors above. What he saw took his breath away. The upper decks of the Celestial Star were remarkably preserved, protected from decay by the anaerobic environment created by the stadium's concrete foundation. Paint still clung to metal surfaces. Windows remained intact in their frames. And when Foster's flashlight swept across the promenade deck, he saw deck chairs still arranged in neat rows, as if waiting for passengers who would never return. The archaeological team worked around the clock, documenting every detail as they carefully opened access points into the ship's interior. What they found inside would shock the world and rewrite everything historians thought they knew about the Celestial Star's disappearance. The first bodies were discovered in the main dining room. Forensic teams counted 89 remains seated at tables, their skeletal hands still resting near silverware and china. The position suggested these people had been dining when something happened, something so sudden they never even stood up. Dr. Foster noted that several skeletons showed no signs of distress or defensive postures. They appeared to have simply stopped living mid-meal. More remains were found throughout the ship. Passengers in their cabins, crew members at their stations, children in the daycare facility still surrounded by toys. The total count would eventually reach 386 bodies, not all 443 who had boarded in Miami, but far more than anyone had expected to find after 47 years. But it was the ship's bridge that provided the first real clues about what had happened. Captain Holloway's body was found slumped over the helm, his skeletal fingers still gripping the wheel. Beside him lay the ship's log, its pages protected by a waterproof pouch he'd apparently sealed before his death. The final entry, written in Holloway's distinctive handwriting, was dated December 4th, 1972, hours after the ship's last radio contact. The entry was brief but chilling. Rudder control lost at 2,334 hours. Ship turning in circles. Navigation systems failing. Crew reports strange mechanical sounds from below. Passengers beginning to panic. Cannot raise Coast Guard. Something wrong with radio. Something wrong with everything. We're being pulled. The last 2 words were underlined 3 times. Dr. Foster's team discovered that the Celestial Star's hull had been deliberately flooded from the inside. Sea valves in the engine room had been opened manually, and the ship's bilge pumps had been disabled. But most disturbing was evidence found in the ship's safe, which contained Captain Holloway's personal effects and a sealed envelope addressed to whoever finds the ship. Inside was a letter that would change everything. The letter, written on Oceanic Voyages International letterhead and signed by company CEO Marcus Pemberton, was dated November 15, 1972, 3 weeks before the Celestial Star's final voyage. Dr. Foster read it aloud to the assembled investigators, his voice trembling slightly. Captain Holloway, this letter confirms your participation in Operation Seabed, a joint venture between Oceanic Voyages International and certain private interests who have requested anonymity. As discussed, the Celestial Star will be the final component in a revolutionary construction project that will transform Miami's waterfront development. Your cooperation in this matter will be compensated as previously agreed. $2 million deposited to the Cayman account, with an additional $500,000 for each crew member who participates willingly. The letter continued with technical details about routing the ship to a specific location off the coast where specialized equipment would be waiting. But the next paragraph made investigators' blood run cold. Regarding passenger safety, We have been assured by our partners that sedation protocols will be humane and painless. The pharmaceutical packages have been loaded aboard as kitchen supplies. Timing is critical. Dinner service on the second night must include the compounds in all dishes. Passengers should be unconscious within 20 minutes, with full cessation following within the hour. No suffering, Captain. That was our absolute requirement. Dr. Foster stopped reading. Several people in the room were openly crying. Sarah Mitchell sat motionless, her face drained of color. Her mother hadn't just been lost in an accident. She'd been murdered as part of a conspiracy so monstrous that it defied comprehension. The investigation exploded into the largest maritime murder case in American history. FBI agents descended on the headquarters of Oceanic Voyages International, only to discover the company had been liquidated in 1973, its assets sold and records destroyed. Marcus Pemberton, the CEO who had signed the letter, had died in 1989, but the private interests he'd mentioned were about to be exposed. Forensic accountants traced the $2 million payment mentioned in the letter. The money had flowed through a complex web of shell companies, but eventually led back to the Fort Lauderdale Waterfront Development Corporation, the same company that had built Bayside Stadium in 1974. Further investigation revealed that the stadium's construction had involved an innovative technique called artificial reef foundation, supposedly using sunken barges to create a stable base in the marshy coastal soil. The truth was far more sinister. The Celestial Star hadn't sunk in the Atlantic. It had been deliberately sailed to a prepared excavation site near the future stadium location. Its passengers and crew drugged and killed. Then the ship itself had been flooded and buried as part of the stadium's foundation. The entire structure had been built on top of a mass grave. Evidence found aboard the ship supported this horrifying scenario. Toxicology tests on tissue samples from the remains showed high levels of a powerful sedative that had been banned in the U.S. since 1968, but was still manufactured overseas. The ship's food storage areas contained empty containers labeled as flour and sugar, but residue analysis revealed pharmaceutical compounds. Captain Holloway and his senior officers had apparently attempted to sabotage the plan at the last minute. His final log entry about losing control suggested they tried to steer the ship away from its intended destination. But the conspirators had been prepared for that possibility. Divers found evidence that the Celestial Star's rudder had been sabotaged before departure, with explosive charges designed to sever the control cables at a specific time. The ship had been doomed from the moment it left Miami Harbor, its passengers and crew nothing more than collateral damage in a scheme driven by greed and utter disregard for human life. The why of the conspiracy became clear as investigators dug deeper into the finances. The Fort Lauderdale waterfront property had been nearly worthless in 1972, marshy, unstable land that couldn't support major construction without massive foundation work. Using a cruise ship as part of the foundation had been a twisted innovation, providing a solid base while eliminating the enormous cost of properly preparing the site. The developers had saved an estimated $50 million in construction costs, and the stadium project had triggered a development boom that made them hundreds of millions more. 23 people were eventually indicted on charges ranging from murder to conspiracy to fraud. Most were in their 70s and 80s now, elderly businessmen and construction executives who had spent decades enjoying wealth built quite literally on the graves of 443 innocent people. Several died before trial. Others cut deals, testifying against their co-conspirators in exchange for reduced sentences. The trials would drag on for years. Sarah Mitchell attended every day of the proceedings. She was 59 years old now, having spent 47 years searching for her mother. When she finally testified about her decades-long quest for the truth, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. The defendants refused to look at her. The remains of the Celestial Star's passengers and crew were finally given proper burials. Sarah scattered her mother's ashes in the Atlantic, finally able to say goodbye after nearly half a century. A memorial was erected at the site where Bayside Stadium once stood, 443 names carved in black granite, a permanent reminder of the victims and the evil that men do in pursuit of money. The story of the celestial star reminds us that sometimes the greatest mysteries are solved not through brilliant detective work, but by accident, patience, and the simple refusal of people like Sarah Mitchell to stop asking questions. Her mother and 442 others had been erased from history, buried beneath concrete and lies. But truth, like the ocean, has a way of eventually rising to the surface. The luxury cruise ship that vanished in 1972 had been found, and with it came justice, however delayed, for those who had been forgotten but never truly gone.